and host of Behind the Scenes on EW Radio here on Sirius XM 105. Emma's latest film is Disney's Beauty and the Beast, the live-action version of the classic cartoon that we've all watched. It's out nationwide on Friday, March 17th. Thank you for joining us, Emma.
Thank you for having me.
And if this interview goes badly, just fair warning, you will all be transformed into pots and pans and housewares. Have to live in the Sirius office for a decade until we can fix things. Emma, in our conversation for the magazine, you talked about something that I would love to explore a little further. Belle Boot Camp.
Yes.
Singing, horseback riding, dancing, these were all things you said you were not an expert in before you began work on this film. So tell us about what Belle Boot Camp involves.
So yeah, I mean, it's crazy for me to think now, but you know, at the beginning of this process, I had never ridden a horse before. I had never sang in a movie before, and I'd certainly never done, you know, a Strictly Come Dancing-esque 4-minute, you know, full-on waltz. So there was quite a lot that I had to, just had to learn, really start from scratch on. And it's so fun to do a movie when you get to, at the end of it, you get to take away new skills with you. So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
How long did that process last before the film?
So Belle Boot Camp was 3 months, a full 3 months of singing lessons 3 or 4 times a week, writing 3 or 4 times a week, and dancing 4 times a week.
Do you sing the songs from the movie, or are you stretching your voice and strengthening your voice by singing other songs?
You're the first person who's asked me that, and actually my singing teacher had me sing other Disney songs. So I actually started off learning and singing songs from Pocahontas and Aladdin, and because there's kind of a really interesting kind of Disney, I don't know what I would call it, like
a style?
A kind of style, exactly, and which is kind of in between classical and sort of theatrical music and pop. It kind of sits in that middle place between the 3 different genres. And so you kind of, there's almost like there's a different tone you need to bring to that. So yeah, I sang lots of Disney songs. Yeah.
Did you already have them memorized from growing up with those songs?
I didn't have very many lyrics to them. I mean, it's pretty amazing to actually do a piece of work where you're like, oh, I already know this scene. Because I just, as a child, you kind of just absorb it all through osmosis. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, my children can almost recite Beauty and the Beast, like they could perform it, just a little boy and girl show, 2 girl show. Yeah,
pretty much, yeah.
So Dan Stevens is your co-star in this. He plays the Prince, the Beast.
Yes.
What are you looking at when you're shooting this? We see him in the fully rendered Beast mode.
Right.
But what does he look like when you're acting in real life with him?
So where we ended up, because we tried at the beginning of the movie to put Dan in full prosthetics and do all of that, and eventually we decided that we would, that Dan would be a 3D kind of special effect. So the way that they did it was that we would shoot the scene together and he would be in kind of a suit which would give him the size and shape of the beast. And then we would go in and we would shoot our scenes again later, and they would it's called motion capture his facial expressions, and they'd use those facial expressions to animate what would become the beast later on. So it was a pretty complicated process, 2-step process, but for me it was wonderful because when I work with Harry Potter or when I did other movies that have special effects, usually I get like a tennis ball, or I get like an LED light, or I get, you know, like an X marks the spot, and that's what I'm acting with. So for me to actually have an actor there with me on set was kind of a luxury. So that aspect was great.
Would he be in costume?
So he wouldn't be in costume. It was really, for the animators, it was to kind of get the size and shape of the beast. And so he was in kind of a grey lycra muscle suit. That's the best way I can explain it. And he was on stilts, but he wasn't furry or anything.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Just had little dots?
Yeah,
like
he had dots and he was like muscled up.
Did he have like the gear, the camera gear? Like sometimes they have a light and a camera on their face to record.
Yeah, no dangling cameras or anything like that. I mean, he was pretty unencumbered, minus the stilts, which we did the dance in, I would like to point out. We did that full waltz with Dan in like proper kind of, God, I don't even know how many inches, probably like 3 or 4 inch sort of steel stilts.
Really?
So, yeah, because when you think of when you think about the dance, you're like, well, it's challenging to do the dance, but to do it with someone that's trying to balance and is wearing this kind of big ungainly suit. It's challenging. Yeah.
What was Beast Boot Camp like? Do you have any sense of that?
Beast Boot Camp was, I think, mostly figuring out the stilts and the suit and how everything was going to translate. And I think Dan, like me, had never sung for a movie before. So both of us were really trying to get to grips with the singing aspect of things.
So the other beings in the castle, you have Madame Garderobe, the wardrobe, played by Audra McDonald. You have Lumiere, played by Ewan McGregor. Cogsworth is Ian McKellen. Mrs. Potts, of course, is Emma Thompson.
Yes.
You're acting with these objects, and they're digitally created for the film, but what are you working with? A similar question to what you did with Dan there. In that case, are you working with a tennis ball? Are you working with a light, or were there real puppetry involved in the film?
No, so the household objects were just was just a teapot, which would later be animated. And sadly, we didn't have the actors there on set for those bits, so I was either reacting to a voice recording, or Bill would be reading a line for a teapot, or whatever else. So it was a bit kind of cobbled together. You know, especially scenes like Be Our Guest, where I'm sat at the table and all of this stuff is happening in front of me. I mean, that's one thing, figuring out how to kind of be in a scene with something that isn't there, but when they're like, it's a candlestick, and it's doing a backflip, and it's doing this, and then it does this, and you're like, oh my God, how am I gonna kind of remember all of these intricate different steps and all this crazy stuff that's going on and make it look as if I'm really reacting to it, especially when it's so specific. You know, he's tasting the dish, or he's doing this or doing that. So it was that scene took forever. I have to say, of all the scenes for all the scenes in the movie, that was the killer. We were there for weeks trying to get that right, and it's just so frustrating because it's such an intangible, you know, you just have nothing to really go on.
And Belle's role in that is somewhat passive. She's the audience for their performance. So it's not like there's much you can do besides 100%. React.
I'm really just sat there kind of, you know, trying to react to whatever's supposedly going on. So, Was there any puppetry involved? No puppetry. No.
I thought maybe the wardrobe might have been somewhat
actually,
mechanical.
The wardrobe, she wasn't in Be Our Guest, but she is kind of, the wardrobe sort of belongs in Belle's bedroom, what becomes Belle's bedroom, and that was a kind of animatronic wardrobe that had various different things that it could do.
What were its
capabilities? It was interesting. It could kind of like shift to and fro, and some of the drawers would open and close, the mouth would move, like little things like that. But at least I had, you know, something to pretend was alive.
So you mentioned your work on the Harry Potter films prepared you for this. You've done a lot of acting opposite visual effects. So what are some of the more surreal experiences, even maybe from the past, that you've just felt it almost becomes absurd when you talk to actors about, you know, like you say, having to act with a tennis ball or a dangling light?
I remember Quidditch games were pretty absurd because that was all green screen, and what you essentially have is an AD, an assistant director with a microphone, who is essentially narrating the action. So you're stood in a stand and they're saying, you know, and Slytherin scores, and so everyone has to like pretend as though that's going on, and they count different, and because the Quidditch players are moving so quickly, they'd be reading, so you'd have like numbers that you'd follow as like kind of like join the dots, which would sort of create the action. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they score, and then this happens, and so you kind of like, your brain kind of feels a bit frazzled because you're trying to play along to something that is not there.
That's acting, isn't it? And that's what a lot of theater acting is too, right?
Yes,
so much suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
Was there anything you saw in the finished version of Beauty and the Beast that surprised you? Sometimes I'll talk to actors and they'll say, oh, that's what we were doing. Like they didn't fully grasp it as the director was explaining it, but then when they see, and sometimes things change in post-production, was there anything that surprised you when you saw it?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. You know, I think really, as I said before, just there was so much that was I mean, the sets and things were all real, so in a sense, there was a good lot of it that I knew what was going to look like. But I mean, really, Dan, Beast, was seeing that kind of over the process of the movie. Between the final cut and the first cut of the movie that I saw, just remarkable what they achieved with making him so real and human and alive and whatever else. I think that was the biggest kind of, wow, this is really happening before my eyes and looks amazing. Yeah. So I'll just do a little reset here. You're listening to the Serious Town Hall on EW Radio, Sirius XM 105. We're talking with Emma Watson about the sorry, not Mrs. Potts. Nearly.
Emma Watson about the new Beauty and the Beast film. We've talked a lot about the independence of Belle, which I think is a fundamental part of the 1991 animated film.
Yes.
But you felt like there was a need to, 20 years later, to add a little more to this story, partly because it's you're giving it a new dimension, literally a new dimension.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the changes that you feel this movie makes to the character of Belle in terms of strengthening her.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a collaboration. You always get given a script, and then the director obviously has very strong ideas, and then you try and shift things a little bit as an actor in the direction of how you imagine the character. But it's always a bit of a tussle. But I think, and obviously the original's so beloved. You don't want to mess with something that's pretty damn near perfect. So I think it was a case of, for me, there was room, I think, taking an animated character and making her a real life breathing person was her costume, because in the original she wears, I mean, it's so elegant, the outfit, but she wears little ballet shoes, and she has her little basket with her white napkin in it, and in ours, Belle does a ton of horse riding, and I immediately, when I saw the sketches, I thought, I'm not sure anyone's going to buy that she's going to be able to race into the forest and go and save Beast in a pair of ballet shoes. It's people aren't going to feel, and I think that's really important when you're doing fantasy, is to make sure that the audience only has to suspend its disbelief for a few moments. If you're constantly kind of going, this just doesn't feel authentic, I think it wears quickly. And anyway, so I put Belle in like muddy riding boots, and we hitched up one side of her skirt, and she wore bloomers underneath so that she could get up and off the horse easily. I gave her kind of like a tool belt, which she could carry her books around in, and she's kind of an inventor in our story. She could carry her tools and whatnot, as opposed to like the basket, which again, with a horse and all sorts of things going on, just not very practical. So small things like that, and then we had the chance to explore a bit more. Okay, so what happened to Belle's mother? What does she do with her spare time? Little things like that. She has a new very small song as well. So we kind of padded out a bit more of her backstory too, which was really fun.
What I like is that she's not just a character who likes to disappear into books. She's interested in their educational value and uses her engineering skills to create the washing machine so that she can free up the other little girls who are not being taught in school. We see the little boys marching into the classroom, but the girls are given laundry to do.
No, you pointed that out last time, actually, that the village is very anti-intellectual, anti-books. It's very anti-young women specifically getting to learn. And that she, in our story, she's an activist in her own community. She's not just pushing herself forward, she's trying to bring people with her. And I think that's one of the reasons why the village turn on her so much, is that they don't like that she's progressive, essentially. She's trying to take things forward, and they change isn't totally welcome.
It never is it?
No.
Never asked for politely. It's got to be taken.
Yeah.
I know that this is an important topic to you, and I know the Disney films are also very special to you, the classic ones that go back decades. And we're talking about updating a film that's was only made in 1991.
Yeah.
So it's about 25 years old, and we've got films that go back 60, 70 years now. so many of those films are much more about finding your Prince Charming,
Yes.
literally finding Prince
Yes.
Charming.
Yes.
But as a fan of those, is there a way you would say, parents should talk to their little kids who do love them? There are things to still love about them. It's not that they
for
should be
sure.
turned away, but...
For sure. I mean, I think that it's, for me, just because in our story, for example, the way that things are moving, the princess isn't waiting to be rescued by the prince, or they're not looking for their Prince Charming. I don't think that should mean that the romance is dead. And I think that's what I love so much about this film, is that it really does celebrate. It's unapologetically romantic. I mean, it really is, and I think that is to be celebrated. I think in the world of Tinder and dating apps and whatever else, we need it more than ever. So, I mean, I guess I would just say that, I think that these stories used to be very gender specific, in the sense that girl supposed to wait for boy to, and I think playing around with those gender roles and the assumptions based on who should be doing what and how all of that should be playing out keeps those really relevant, and I think both sexes and genders need and would like a bit of rescuing. So yeah.
You talk about romance, and there's something in the film that is controversial to some, but to me, again, as the father of two little kids, I really love. There's talk of like a gay love story in this, which really is. It comes down to a couple of smiles and like a partial dance. But LeFou has a crush on Gaston. Josh Gad's character has this sort of like veiled affection for Gaston.
I think that's what's so fantastic about Josh's performance, is that it's so subtle. It's always like, does he idolize Gaston? Is he in love with Gaston? Like, what's the relationship there? And I think it's incredibly subtle, to be perfectly honest. I don't want people going into this movie thinking that there's like a huge sort of narrative there. There really isn't. It's incredibly subtle, and it's kind of a play on having the audience go, is it not? And I think it's fun. I mean, I think that it's sort of, I love the ambiguity of that. It's really, it's interesting.
The whole movie, though, I think takes an effort to expand its horizons a little bit. It's set in the south of France, but it's not like the village is full of white characters.
Yes,
you have a sort of multicultural population. And when I talked to the director, Bill Condon, about this, he said, well, it could be that they came from Morocco. Like he said there's some logic to it, but also it's a movie about a girl who falls in love with a man who's magically been transformed into a beast and has candle friends. Like, maybe we could suspend disbelief a little bit more to just say all sorts of people can live in this village.
Ultimately, these parts and these roles, fairy tales in general, are full of archetypes and universal themes. And each time a new generation tells these stories, they use these fairy tales as a mirror for their own society and their own culture. And we live in a diverse culture and society. We live in a global world, and I think Bill felt that it was very important that the film represent that diverse society, represent the more global world that we live in, and that's why our movie does that.
So Wednesday was International Women's Day, and you're active with the United Nations He for She program. Feminism, as we've already discussed, is very important to you. How did you spend the day?
So I spend the day book ninjaing, which is the way that I describe it. Actually, there's an organisation that I work with they call themselves Book Fairies. But I did 5 different book drops around iconic sort of feminist locations in New York. So I went and I left books next to the Gertrude Stein statue, the Eleanor Roosevelt, the Joan of Arc, and the Blue Stockings Library, Blue Stockings Radical Bookstore. And there was one more which I'm missing off.
Was it Gloria Steinem's house?
Oh, I did that in the evening. But yeah, so I was busy. I was running around all over town. It's really fun. It's really fun.
Go ahead.
And I loved, because it's kind of become a thing now, a few people who saw me were like, "You're doing the thing, you're leaving the book." So I was like, yes, yeah, I am. So it's nice because, you know, I think sometimes people see the books and they're like, they must be for someone else or whatever else. But people now...
Or someone forgot it.
Yeah, or someone left it or whatever. So people are picking them up now and they're more curious and whatever else. So it's nice.
I saw a headline that said Emma Watson is leaving books all over the world, and I thought, when did she get Santa Claus powers?
I know, so fun.
So you had helpers all around the world doing this to book fairies?
After I did the first book drop, I started getting letters from all over the world being like, come and do it in, you know, Dubai, come and do it in Japan or wherever. And so Cordelia and I, who helps me do it, we sort of coordinated this international book drop where we had volunteers from every country and we sent them books and they went and left them around. It was remarkable. We actually managed to do 26 different countries around the world. So really fun.
Watch out,
really,
Easter Bunny.
Really
Tooth
fun.
Fairy,
I
Emma
know.
Watson.
I'm coming for you. I am after your job.
What were the books that you, are they the same? Is there a limited number of books or a whole variety?
No, so this was the other cool thing was that previously I would leave books for that specific month of my book club, whatever our book club choice was. We actually left books from you know, the last, I think 6 or 7 months. We left 6 or 7 different feminist titles. So we had Gloria Steinem's new book, My Life on the Road. We had Caitlin Moran's How to Be a Woman. We had The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, Persepolis. So yeah, we left a range of different ones. It was pretty cool.
Do you foresee yourself continuing this in the future, or it seems like you enjoy it a lot?
I do. It's really fun. It's sort of civil disobedience is fun. I shouldn't be advertising that, but yeah, it was no. As long as people keep asking and volunteering, I'm super down to keep doing it.
What are you reading at the moment? I know you have Our Shared Shelf as your book club.
Yeah, you know, my friend gave me for Christmas, she's a psychiatrist, and she gave me Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is a pretty amazing book. It's got some pretty heavy subject matter, but it's actually surprisingly sort of readable, and it's actually very short, but yeah, I loved it. Really loved it. Some really good words of wisdom in there. He's a very clever man. Yeah.
When we spoke last time, it was a few days before the Women's March, and I know you participated in it. I saw some photos of you out. Were you with your mother?
I was with my mum. Yeah.
Where did you march? Which city were you in?
We flew to Washington D.C., which was actually amazing because it was her who messaged me saying, you know, when are we booking flights to DC? I was like, wow, okay.
Radical mom.
Yeah, radical mom, love it. Yeah, she was, it's her first ever protest. It was my first ever protest. And I think we loved that it just felt so, there was something that actually in the energy that felt very celebratory. It felt very celebratory of the work that we've done, that we continue to do. It felt really joyful, and I love the age ranges as well. Like lots of very young kids there, all the way through to, you know, grandmas marching for their granddaughters. Like it was very cross-generational and very peaceful, and yeah, very very joyful in its own way. You know, like serious, but you know, I think it also had a great sense of humor, which is key. It's absolutely key.
Why is that so important? I think you're right, but I'd love to hear why you think that's true.
I think as long as no one is... there's something about humour to me which speaks to humility, which speaks to, to being humble, to being human, to... It's such a way to connect people, and I think as long as you're not taking yourself too seriously... Nothing can go too badly wrong.
If there's a case of fear, you don't laugh when you're afraid. I think it's a sign of strength if you can laugh at something.
100%, 100%, and it's if you can find the funny side of things, and if you can laugh together in very difficult moments, you know, as you say, I don't think there's a lot that can that can totally stop you or tear you down.
It's
It's a sign of resilience.
Yeah, and unity too.
Unity and
anybody who's
resilience.
seen a comedy in a movie theater knows it's more fun to laugh in a whole room full of people
Than
than
it is
alone.
to laugh alone, for sure.
Exactly.
For sure.
So we're talking with Emma Watson here on Sirius XM Entertainment Weekly Radio about her new film, Beauty and the Beast. And but also you've got a lot on the horizon in your future. One of the films coming up in just over a month is The Circle. It comes out on April 28th. This is based on a book by Dave Eggers. I believe you wrote the screenplay too, didn't you?
He did, yeah.
Yeah, and it's directed by James Ponsoldt.
Yeah.
Co-stars Tom Hanks. You play a young woman who's part of a new tech company, a pioneering organization. Can you tell us about the story of The Circle?
Yeah, so the story's kind of about... What I love about the film is that it could kind of be now. It's not set as a kind of like future dystopian world. It's sort of like, okay, let's say we're in 2017, and we're going to imagine that all of these big tech companies became one kind of huge conglomerate. And what would happen if they had the monopoly on our personal information? So...
really not very science fiction-y.
It's actually not that science fiction-y at all. And what that would mean for democracy, what that would mean for civil rights, what that would mean for... it's... what that would mean is kind of like... it's
for
kind
relationships,
of,
too.
For relationships. It's kind of George Orwell's 1984, but written... for now. What would happen if this started to happen tomorrow? And it's really interesting because it juggles what's private, what's not, what's personal information, what should people be able to access, not access. And it deals with all of that. It's interesting because we made the movie before the election. But actually, I think now that the election has happened, I think the film really... I'll be interested to see what people think of it, because I think it kind of it speaks so much to what is going on sort of right now.
It's also about self-surveillance, isn't it? It's about how you behave when you're being watched, and in a way we already do that. We tweet about where we are, we Instagram about where we are, Facebook updates. It reminds me of like years ago, our nieces would have to text their mom and dad to say whether they were at the football game or where they were. And now it's like, we do that sort of, you don't even have to be asked. You voluntarily give out your coordinates every few minutes.
I think also it looks at the effects of constantly being so self-aware and always being ready to smile for a picture, always ready to be on camera, always ready to share a detail of your life, and to be constantly kind of like curating your life. Whether it be like what you're eating for breakfast through to what you're saying to a friend, and the kind of like paranoia and that kind of gives birth to, and how just like exhausting it is for human beings to constantly feel like they need to be on. And the kind of toll that's taking, I think, is really interesting. I think for me, just recently, I have had to put some boundaries on. Because you can access everything instantly from your phone, it's so much more difficult now, I feel like, to get any kind of reprieve from it all. It's a constant inundation of emails, social media alerts, news alerts, media alerts, whatever else. And sometimes it kind of feels like, whoa, this is a lot to manage constantly.
Overload.
It's overload. I actually recently deleted my mail app off my phone so to make me go and sit down at a computer and actually be like, okay, now I'm going to do this one thing at a time, or now I'm going to check the news one thing at a time, because I found that I would be constantly doing like 6 things at once, or reading 6 different articles. I would be on Twitter and messaging someone and looking at Instagram and reading the news and an email, and like I was like, oh my God.
Hard to live in the moment.
Yeah, it's very difficult to be present, and very difficult to be present, and very difficult to kind of, you lose your focus. And really, as human beings, like I feel like the most valuable thing that we have is our time and our attention. And if our attention and our time is constantly being eaten by those things, we're letting these things eat our most valuable commodity. So I've had to put some boundaries in place, I think. And I think being part of the film really made me think about these things a lot more than I was maybe thinking about them before.
Yeah, I wondered how much of it was your feeling about it before you came in, and how much did the film change your perspective on?
Yeah, I think for sure, I know it did. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do the movie, because I was like, you know, it was something that I read and I couldn't really stop thinking about. And I always know that's the kind of movie that I want to be in. If days or weeks later I'm like, you know, I'm still pondering an aspect of it, or I want to talk about, or, you know, and I would still, I mean, I still call Dave and I go, what do you think about this? Is there an answer to this? Is there a solution to this? Is there a whatever? I mean, the film, like a lot of great films do, I think, like, throws up a lot of questions. I think audience members will come out and want to go for a beer so that they can really kind of like hash it out.
That's a good movie, one that you can have a conversation about after the fact.
I think so.
So Tom Hanks plays a kind of, I think on the surface you'd say he's sort of a Steve Jobs type. He's the head of this company, but he's also very charismatic.
Yes.
Are there any other like real life figures that factor into the type of person he plays? He's not playing anybody from real life, but
interesting.
Is there a Bill Gates element? Is there?
I think what's so terrifying about Bailey, as you say, is that he's incredibly powerful and smart, but he also has this kind of deeply charismatic, almost like showman element to him, which I feel like makes him slightly unstoppable, because he can sell even the worst idea ever to you and make you feel as if you've just won the lottery.
Because he looks like Tom Hanks.
Well, because Tom Hanks is like,
yeah.
Who wouldn't buy anything from Tom Hanks?
Of course. I trust him with my life.
Yeah, totally. I would put, if I was going to put my life in anyone's hands, it would probably be Tom. So I think he brings that to the role, and it makes it incredibly complex. The way that you feel about Bailey, very complex, which is fun. It's fun. I think Tom really enjoyed playing the role because he could really manipulate that.
He gets to be terrifying and play against.
Yeah, he gets to be scary.
You also co-star with John Boyega in the film. Tell me about who he plays.
So he plays one of the kind of there's kind of this triumvirate. There's this triangle of power at the top of this company, and John Boyega kind of plays the young genius who kind of had the idea, started this company in his garage, masterminded the whole thing, and he kind of has
now what
regrets.
have I done?
Yeah,
what
he kind of like he was the one who unlocked this beast that he didn't realize what it could become, and is kind of desperately trying to stuff the genie back in the bottle. So yeah, it's a great part. It was wonderful to work with him, and actually really funny. I worked opposite two other Brits, so John Boyega, and then my friend in the movie is played by Karen Gillian, a fantastic actress who's actually Scottish. So the three of us were like, you know, we were like putting on our American accents. Tom was like, how did you Brits get in here? Like, what are you know, how did we end up with this? But yeah, it was very fun.
Another actor you appear with in the film is Bill Paxton, who sadly just passed away. He plays your father.
Yes.
And is one of the pressures on your character that he's sick.
Yeah.
But what's wrong with him? And can you talk about working with Bill?
So Bill plays my father, who doesn't have the medical insurance that he needs basically in order to have himself taken care of properly, and he's sort of slowly destabilizing, he's sort of slowly going downhill, and I think the sense of powerlessness that May feels that she can't stop this and she can't help him is the way that the circle really get its claws into her, because they start to sort of, through her, he gets medical insurance that she can take care of him. And it's a way that she begins to feel so indebted to this company that she sort of stops being able to have a way out, or really to have a sense of her own mind or identity. And I think that that's a very emotive way to sort of control someone is if you feel that care that's there for your family is going to go.
A responsibility,
Yeah, and responsibility. I think that's a tough one. So the film really deals with that, and I hope you won't mind if I don't talk about Bill, but it was very sad. I enjoy working with him a lot. Yeah,
he was a wonderful guy. I met him many times interviewing him, and he had a real everyman quality to him, just like Tom Hanks in some ways, very warm.
It was a bit of a shock. I'm still reeling a bit.
Yeah. Well, Another story I read recently that I actually didn't know very much about, but La La Land just won.
Yes.
Didn't win Best Picture, but won the Oscar for Emma Stone,
Yes.
and this was a role that you were potentially up for. Can you? I've read a lot of conflicting reports. Can you sort of clarify? Were you up for this part, and how do you feel now?
It's one of these frustrating things where sort of names get attached to projects very early on as a way to kind of build anticipation or excitement for something that's coming before it's really anything is actually sort of agreed or set in stone. And it's very common, but it was one of those situations where I had been committed to Beating the Beast at that point for, the idea of the project itself for years actually, and then at Disney had been attached to that for a number of months. And I knew, as we talked about before, that this wasn't a movie I could just sort of step into. I knew I had horse training, I knew I had dancing, I knew I had 3 months of singing ahead of me, and I knew I had to be in London to really do that. And this wasn't a movie I could just kind of parachute into. I knew I had to do the work, and I had to be where I had to be. So, scheduling conflict wise, it didn't work out. But I'm so thrilled that musicals are so celebrated at the moment, that they seem to be back in the zeitgeist, and that people are kind of celebrating and loving music and singing and dancing again. And I thought the film was wonderful, and it's lovely.
Is that something you'd like to do more of in the future, now that you've been through Belle Boot Camp?
Now that I've been through Belle Boot Camp, I can take anything. I am ready for anything now.
But would you like musicals? Is that something you'd like to do?
Yeah, I would actually. I just, at first the singing thing for me was really tough. I felt very, very vulnerable, honestly. There's something about when you act or you play a character, there's something a little bit to hide behind. But when you sing, there's like this vulnerability that I cannot even begin to explain to you. It's so raw. There's just nowhere to hide. And I also had this weird neurotic paranoia that I was like Florence Foster Jenkins, that Meryl Streep part that she played recently,
Right.
and that no one around me could bring themselves to tell me that I was actually, in fact, a terrible, terrible singer. And I carried this around with me for months, and it was kind of a barrier I had to break through, whereas, like, you got to get a grip on yourself, Em, because I knew I would be performing some of this stuff live. I knew I'd be doing it in front of a huge audience. I knew this musical was beloved. It's mildly terrifying singing for Alan Menken. He's one of the most talented, incredible composers in my mind, of all time. I mean, I think it would be fair to use the word genius in that context. And I really kind of had to find this kind of belief in myself and push through. And but I loved it. Once I got myself there, it's so much fun. It really, really is.
In our previous conversation, you said you hadn't met with Paige O'Hara, who did the singing and the voice of Belle in the animated film, but was she was at the premiere? Did you cross paths there?
The LA premiere, I have to say, was really overwhelming for me, because it was the first time I'd ever met Paige, who played the original Belle in the animated movie. I met Linda Wolverton, who wrote my character. She's written a ton of Disney movies. She was involved in The Lion King, among other things. She wrote Maleficent. And as if that wasn't enough, so I was like, oh, Paige, Linda, Alan Menken, the whole cast, oh my God. And then Celine Dion comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming. And she is someone who, I don't come from a family that are particularly theatre or movie or Hollywood orientated, but my mum loves Celine Dion, and I love Celine Dion, and we used to listen to Celine Dion together, and I was just like, so psyched to tell her that she had been such a part of my childhood, that the movie had been such a big part of my childhood, and to get to meet her and for her to be part of our movie, this new version, for her she sings the song over the credits at the end. It's just it doesn't really get any better than that, does it? I want a soundtrack with Celine Dion. I mean, come on, it's so cool. So some good moments, but wow, I stepped off that red carpet and I was like, I need to sit down for a minute. This was a lot.
Did you just have cross paths with Paige O'Hara momentarily, or did you get to talk about Belle? Like, you have this shared experience between
I know.
you.
You know what? We didn't get to talk for very long. I spoke to Linda Wolverton for longer, actually, because I ended up speaking to her about some of the script stuff and the story stuff, and there was some stuff I wanted to understand better, but that was my first time meeting Paige.
You've been on the other side of this, having played Hermione Granger in the Harry Potter films.
Yeah.
You've watched another actress pick up the role of this character for the stage show Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Noma Dumezweni. And you said you were overwhelmed by the feeling of seeing her perform because it felt good to see Hermione live.
Yeah. Oh my
carried
God.
on.
It's so funny because I went to see the stage production with I guess I just didn't think that I just didn't think through what it could mean to me. I didn't know what to expect, really. So I went in with very just like, I don't know, without thinking about it too much, I guess. And I was not prepared for how emotional it was for me to meet Noma, who plays the new Hermione. She came into, I was in like a little room off the side of the theatre, and she came in and gave me this big hug, and I just burst into tears. I was like, it was so emotional for me to know that Hermione was going to be okay, and that everything kind of worked out, and like what her future would look like. And it was also such a relief, kind of in a way, to share her with someone, because to share that with another person and to know what it was like to be part of that character's life. I don't know how to explain it.
It's like a Horcrux in a way, isn't it?
It
because
is.
she's now living in another person.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And
Positive
and also
Horcrux.
I felt like, you know, being part of Harry Potter was something I grew up with, and I was in it for over a decade, and I'd been part of this family. And then the theatre group welcomed me like I was part of their family immediately. And that was really emotional for me too, because they made me feel that I was still part of it. And that was very moving for me too, I think. But I loved it. It's so good. If you're in London and you get the chance to go and see it, you must go and see it. It's really, really brilliant.
Now, the character as she plays her is in middle age. As the years go by, do you ever foresee a return on screen as Hermione? I know there's a lot of like contracts.
You don't know what you're
scheduling.
doing. You're causing carnage. No, I definitely nothing planned at the moment. You know, we only just finished our it was not so long ago that we finished our original series, and I wouldn't want to get anyone's hopes up, for sure.
I'll ask you again in 20 years.
Yeah, ask me in another 10.
10? Okay.
Yeah, give me another 10, and then we'll talk about it.
I want to thank you for being here with us. Thank the audience for sitting in on our conversation. That's going to do it for our Entertainment Weekly Radio Town Hall with Emma Watson. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can watch Emma play Belle on the big screen in Disney's Beauty and the Beast on Friday, March 17th. Let's hear it for Emma Watson.